hold on tight. 'Cause you know tomorrow may not bring that same thing that you said last night. Woo! Every time I find a little peace of mind, I hold on tight. 'Cause tomorrow may not bring the very same thing. No, no, no. Said none of the right there. You that care all. Just for me, I'm so glad that you that care all. Just for me, I'm so glad that you that care all. For a sinner like me. Well, hello, Gregory. Asher, how you doing?
I'm doing great, cousin. It's so good to see you, Billy. I know you was referred to by Billy. So
Yeah, yeah. When they say Billy, I know they've been around for a minute. That's what Mama called me and everybody else Billy.
yeah, yeah. And I remember Antini
Yeah, Teeny.
referring to you.
Teeny called me
Yeah,
Billy.
yeah,
Yeah, so
right.
that's just what they called me growing up. That's fine. You know, every now and
Okay.
then it's a William or a Bill, but I answer to all of that. I'm really glad that you took the time to come on the show. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit about where were you?
I grew up in Compton, California, born and raised in 1956. It was a total of 10 children to my mom and my dad. 'Cause my dad, Sidney E. Asher Sr., hashtag Robinson. Kind of wondering where the Robinson came from, and because I was always curious about that. It was 10 of us. We grew up. We went through some issues with my dad. My dad was dealing with some problems that was it was he carried a monkey on his back. My mom raised us. Two of my brothers and sisters, they died at birth. So it was a total of eight of us, four girls and four boys. Didn't have a whole lot, but the little we had, we shared it. Made sure everybody had some. We went through some hard times. The period well when I came up, we was dealing with the Watts riot, early '60s, and the assassination of Kennedy, JFK, and then the assassination of Martin. Things was rough, but my mom always seemed to uh, find a way to survive, and find a way to keep us pointing in the right direction. Raising eight kids, especially four boys, is I mean, but today's standard, I couldn't see anybody doing that, and but my mom, she kind of ruled with an iron fist. Whatever was going on outside the house, I was more afraid of my mom than I was of what was going out on the street.
I think we were just kind of raised like that because, even
Mhm.
my grandmother, I just feared them women. Once again, even way back then, this culture of the father not really being present in the home, not really
Right.
doing their part in the home. How did that kind of affect you? I know how it affected me, but this is your story.
Well, I mean, it affected me in a bad way because I can remember my older brothers. I had two older brothers, and my dad used to coach baseball. And when they were coming up, my dad was coaching them, but I never got the opportunity to experience that. It wasn't really all my dad's fault that he wasn't in the home. Back in those days, the system, was taking the men out of the house.
Right.
When they came up with that welfare, families were getting county assistance, but the husband couldn't be in the home. And so I remember times when social worker used to come home and my dad used to hide in the closet, so he wouldn't be seen in the home, and so it pushes out. And then with his problem, I didn't get the opportunity to play sports, for him to see me play sports, or anything really, because from the time I was probably in the fifth grade is when my dad was coming and going. I used to be envious of guys that had their fathers, because all my events that took place in my years growing up, my mom was the center point, because my dad wasn't in the picture. It kind of made me feel like, okay, well, I'm not gonna be that type of father. If I'm gonna have kids, then I'm gonna make sure that I'm in everything that they partake in, you know, even to the point where I notice now in my older years that by me making that statement and living up to that statement, I overshot what I should have done. I believe that, by not having my dad made me be like that, because I was like, well, I would never desert my kids or not be part of their lives, because my dad, he they moved to Oregon, and that was during the time I was in high school. I didn't know why my dad moved, all the way to Oregon at that time, but I found out later, because the system, were prosecuting what they considered deadbeat dads. I did a lot of things that, I was ashamed about that took me away from being the father that I wanted to be because I started getting heavily into the drugs. And, this was during the time after I got out of the military, and because I remember one time I took my daughter with me, my oldest daughter. At that time, she was probably 11, and I took her to a dope house with me.
No.
And I told her to sit out in the car, and I'll be right back. And that was like, this was like early in the morning. And by the time I came back out, it was late in the evening. You know, the financial thing was taking a toll, because my finances, I was spending more than I should have on, doing what I was doing. And that was taken from the household.
It seems like to be at a point where you're doing what you just said to me, seemed like you were kind of caught up. That didn't sound like one time move.
There's been several times where, I put my, not only my life at risk, but my kids' lives at risk, chasing things that I shouldn't have been chasing, and I started feeling less than I should have been. I was like, man, I never thought that I would be doing this, but the thought was fleeting, because whatever I was doing was in control, and no matter what I had to do to get it, you know,
Wait, wait,
it,
wait.
it was just
Wait, cuz, wait. I don't want to hop over that.
Right.
Don't tell me nothing that because it'll be broadcast. But when you say do whatever to get it, that had a little cut to it.
Hmm.
Oh,
The cut is the embarrassing, feeling, because when I think about it, even today, that pain and the deep down dark feeling, surfaces, and because I mean, because it was rough times.
you said you do it, do things. It sounds like somebody that if you had around you and you laid something down or something, you might have to keep my eye on you.
Yeah, it was like that. It was like, if you laid it down, and you wasn't looking, it I don't know what happened to it. I didn't see it. I promise you, I didn't see it. People was cautious of you, because they knew what was going on, and in spite of you thinking that, hey, I got it all together. I'm still looking sharp. Although I done lost about 60 pounds.
Seriously, you sound like you were really sprung, Greg.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was. I mean, it was just something that took over. I mean, when the cocaine epidemic came about, it was just, man, it was a wonder drug, to be honest with you.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, and it was the first drug that I actually fell in love with. Because it was like, man, this feels, like euphoria.
Let me ask you this: Was when you were going through this, were your kids staying with you, the mother? What was the situation for the children?
Well, in the beginning, they were staying with both of us. As the years passed, we started having relationship problem with their mom, and we kind of split up for a minute, went our own way, and then came back together, and we made a geographical move. We moved up to Portland, and we moved up there in 1980, to try to see if we can get it back together, which, was a waste of time. We only stayed up there, what, maybe a couple of years, and then we ended up coming back. And, I went right back to, what I was doing. I was back around the connections. Eventually, we split up, we separated, and the kids. In the beginning, they came to stay with me because of certain things that was going on in the mom's household, and so they came to stay with me. But at that time, I was still dealing with my drug problem, and I was staying with mom, at that time. And, so I ended up bringing my two kids, my two oldest kids, to live with me at my mom's house, and that was, uh, that was a struggle in itself, because I'm trying to work, my kids, now my mom, I'm depending on my mom to make sure my kids get to school and get home okay. It was a strain, it was a struggle.
Can you get into like about how long this lasted and what happened when you started to pull up and when you really turned your back on this type of lifestyle?
It really started when I went into the military in 1974. And, that's when I really started drinking because, growing up during my early years, I really wasn't into drugs and alcohol, and then in the military, I started drinking, and then I got introduced to drugs and I started doing different drugs, and so, it went on through my last 2 years in the military. And then when I got out, I kind of steered straight a little bit, or I pushed the gorilla down. He wasn't standing on me. He was behind me, but he wasn't standing on me. So but eventually, it caught back up to me. I started doing the things that I shouldn't have been doing, drinking a lot, smoking a lot of weed, and at that time, I used to tell people, I identify as a more, the more you got, the more I'll do it, and so I started experimenting with a lot of different drugs, angel dust, this the drug they call lovely, uh,
Yeah.
uh, PCP.
Is that what they
Uh,
call water?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Water, lovely. Okay.
Yeah. You go get that dip. When I left the military, when I was over in Korea, man, I was over there drinking. I remember when I used to go down to the clubs and I see these brothers in the club doing this. They doing this all night. And I asked the brother, I said, man, I said, what's going on? He said, oh, they drinking that nod, they drinking that liquid codeine. And I was like, oh man, I'll never do that shit. And about 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the club, my head nodding, so I started drinking that and then, using a lot of different pills and stuff, and then it was happening in spurts. After I got out the military, like I said, I kind of cleaned myself up, kind of went straight. Then, it started coming back because my ex-wife, her brothers and stuff, they were, heavily into the gangs and into the drug thing, and they would be cooking up the stuff around, and shit. I was like, well, yeah, you cooking it up, after you do what you do, I'm gonna take the bowl. I'll take the bowl, I'll get the rest of the chips off the bowl, you know. And so that went on until about 94. I went and told my mom. I said, Mom, I got a problem, and she said, what is it? I told her, I said, I got a problem with cocaine. And she said, well, it's about time you admitted it, and I was like, what you mean? She's like, well, everybody knew but you. I got introduced to a drug treatment program at Kaiser. And I went in there in 94, and I'll never forget. You remember this movie character named Huggy Bear?
Yep.
He played on,
Yeah, and he
yeah,
had the
okay.
fish.
Right,
He had
right,
those
right.
fish platforms when he got out of
Yeah,
jail.
the
I was like, all
platform, that's
right,
right.
ah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I remember him.
Yeah. Well, his brother was working at Kaiser in the drug treatment program. And when I saw him, I was like, man, I'm like, I don't know if that's Huggy Bear, all right? So I mean, he was a hardcore. He was a straight liner. He was doing the straight line with the heroin. He started talking to him, and I was telling him, I said, man, I need something, to help me battle this demon that I'm dealing with. And he said, well, the only thing they have is outpatient program, right? I was like, man, I need an inpatient program. I need to be locked up somewhere, So he told me, he said, well, Greg, he said, I'm gonna be honest with you. He said, the only thing we got is this outpatient program. He said, but if you're really tired, he said, you'll take anything that comes your way if you're really tired, right? And I told him, I said, man, I'm tired, but I had two primos rolled up in my pocket, and I was like, okay, well, I check in Monday, so this is Friday, so Saturday and Sunday, I can continue doing what I'm doing
Right,
until
right.
Monday,
You
right?
had it all figured out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a plan. that weekend, I tried and I tried and I tried, and it seemed like no matter what I did, I was not getting the effect, that I once got, and so that Monday I showed up early. I showed up at 7 o'clock. I stayed in the program. It went from to 3:30. Right? But the requirements is you had to do a meeting before the program and a meeting after the program, right? And so he said that if you do that, he said you won't give yourself time to think of nothing else, right? So I got up. I used to go to this early bird meeting. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, be at the meeting at 6. The meeting lasts an hour. I get from there to Kaiser. I check into the day treatment program. I do the program for the whole day. Then after I get out, I go to a meeting and I'll be like, well, I don't really feel nothing. So I say, okay, well, I'm gonna go to another meeting. Right. So by the time I got out of that meeting, I was too tired to do anything else. So I went home and crashed and I did that the next day and I did it the next day and I did it the next day, and before I knew it, I had 30 days, under my belt. I had committed myself to do whatever it took, to fight what I was fighting, because he told me if you just put yourself around the right people in the right circumstances, you'll be okay. You give yourself a safety net, so that's what I did.
I'm glad that things worked out for you. I'm glad that you kept putting it
Yeah.
behind you because it seemed like you were killing yourself. Not only yourself, it's like you were
Oh, yeah.
killing other people too.
Right.
What's your
Yeah. Yeah.
relationship with your children and the late and your ex-wife and all that?
Well, there's no relationship with my ex-wife nor my two oldest kids. That was something that I fought for a long time because my son is 46 and my daughter's 44. And when me and the mom separated, my son was 16 and my daughter was 14.
Wow.
So, so that's been like 30 years. I never really understood why my ex-wife, we, my ex-wife, why she felt the way she felt because she was the one who decided to move on with her life. I ended up meeting another young lady, a lot younger than me, and but I met her at a time where, I was alone, lonely, in need, and so we ended up getting together, and my daughter and my son, they were coming back and forth, living with me, as well as she was. She always had respect for my kids. I mean, she treated them, to be honest with you, a lot better than their own mom did. I had moved on, with my life, not not saying that you can't be part of my life, but you have to accept where I'm at in my life, as well as me accepting where you are. I've tried over and over again to make amends with my kids. It never came about, and it's been, like I said, it's been over 20 years, that we've not had any type of relationship at all. My current wife, we have a stable relationship, and we have two girls together, and I have a beautiful relationship with these two.
I would just like to
Yeah.
say something to you, cousin. Uh, the years that you're talking about in the relationship. I had a child,
Mhm.
my first child. If you look on her name is Mary. And if you ever go through some of our interviews, we did one.
It was 35 years. The Lord, God, Jesus, the higher power, whatever you feel comfortable saying, know that something clicked inside of you. And we were raised like that. But it doesn't really mean anything until you accept. Can you just really get into some of the moments of when you really started listening to that voice inside, and when you started to understanding that when things were leaving you and you were being delivered, how joy and peace started to come into your world?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, one of the main experiences that helped me deal with um, the issue with my ex-wife, because my ex-wife, she crossed the street, and that really, kind of made me hit rock bottom, because I was like, man, how are my homeboys gonna see me? I mean, man, I can understand that, if she left you for another dude, but leave you for another female, that that
Well,
kind of stings, that kind of stings a little bit.
well, another episode of Where Were You? And we would like to thank our guests for this evening. Also want to thank New Me. New Me helps sponsor Where Were You? So go on and check it out. New Me /Arkway. Also, go on and hit that like. Go on and hit subscribe. Go on and hit that share. Go on and leave a comment. And if you find anyone that has a story, let me know. And hey, you bless someone today.